didn't notice that his back was covered in cold sweat. All of this was too strange, and the cautious Zhang Yi didn't want to stay any longer. Moreover, the golden-winged mutant had left, which meant that they couldn't stay here any longer. Therefore, Zhang Yi directly opened the dimensional gate and quickly left the place. Zhang Yi didn't go far. Before leaving, he secretly left a miniature camera inside to observe any changes here and prevent anyone from stealing the chicken. After him, the tall mutant and the golden-armored mutant hesitated slightly, but they could sense the strangeness behind the door and chose not to continue the adventure. Their current identities and status were too exalted, so saving their lives was definitely the most important thing. In the end, only the Undertaker was left standing on the blood river. He looked back at the gate, which was still flowing with sticky blood, sighed softly, put his hands together, and chanted the Buddha's name. The blood was still flowing, and the gate showed no signs of opening. The mournful song behind him continued to ring out. It was only when the blood filled the entire valley and formed a huge pool that it stopped flowing out. Everything slowly returned to calm, except for the huge Demon Kingdom door, which had changed from its original blue-black color to a dark red. The Undertaker put down his hands, didn't even glance back, and turned to leave. Just like that? Zhang Yi frowned, unable to help feeling suspicious. Wasn't he afraid that others would come back later? Or was it that even if others sneaked over, they wouldn't be able to open the Demon Kingdom's gates? The keys in the hands of the four great families, could they be necessary to open the gates of the Demon Kingdom? Zhang Yi fell into a brief reverie. The Undertaker and the golden-winged mutant had left the gates of the Demon Kingdom, which had been turned into a huge pool of blood. Zhang Yi was a little curious, but didn't dare to go closer to take a look. He silently thought that the other two unidentified epsilons might go closer. So he held his breath, concentrated, and waited silently in the distance. As a result, he waited for a full hour. Zhang Yi even thought that the two had left. But finally, just as he was about to give up, he saw the tall mutant in black combat uniform return to the Demon Kingdom's gates. The tall mutant first crouched down and carefully inspected the pool of blood, then stood up straight and walked straight towards the gates. He waded through the sticky pool of blood and stepped up to the door, holding his guardian shield in his left hand and his knight's longsword in his right hand for safety. When he reached the gate, he cautiously tested it, then suddenly raised the knight longsword in his hand and struck the huge door with a single blow. Boom! A towering black flame spread, and the terrifying power made Zhang Yi, who was far away, feel the earth tremble. However, the dark door did not move an inch. The full force of the white chariot-level mutant strike only left a deep scratch on the door, but did not smash it to pieces. From this, one could see how sturdy the door that was used to seal the demon clan back then was. Seeing this, the tall mutant took a few steps back, seemed to ponder for a moment, and then left the place. Zhang Yi could clearly feel that the power of his strike was no less than his own full force. This person's strength was definitely not inferior to his. Zhang Yi thought about it for a long time, but couldn't think of where else in the Huashu Kingdom there could be such a skilled fighter. If there really was, he had definitely never seen him before. But the fact that the other party gave up attacking the Demon Kingdom's gate proved that he couldn't open it with his own strength. In that case, Zhang Yi and the others couldn't either. Zhang Yi waited for a long time, wanting to see if the golden-armored mutant would make a move. Sure enough, not long after, the golden-armored mutant also arrived in front of the gate. However, he only stretched out his hand, felt the sword marks left by the tall mutant, smiled and shook his head, then turned and left without hesitation. Zhang Yi finally understood that if he wanted to enter the Demon Kingdom, his own strength alone was not enough. It was an extremely special area that seemed to be able to suppress supernatural powers, and even Zhang Yi's space power couldn't penetrate it. So, there was only one way to enter the Demon Kingdom, and that was to follow the Paji family after the Dharma assembly. But who are these guys? A dark cloud floated in Zhang Yi's heart. 5 epsilons were a magnificent gathering of top-level mutants in the entire world today. The last time so many epsilons gathered was in Xinjiang. However, it was clear that these people were not old acquaintances. When they fought against the Undertaker and the Golden Winged Mutant, they displayed tremendous power. Even though they deliberately concealed their abilities, they couldn't hold back too much in that situation. Zhang Yi was certain of one thing: he had never come into contact with these people before. This was because the abilities of mutants were very obvious and not easy to hide. The situation here is too complicated. The Undertaker of Sunga Temple seems to have known about our arrival long ago and deliberately set up a trap here, using our hands to open the seal on the Demon Kingdom's doors. Did the Paji family have anything to do with this? A cold look flashed in Zhang Yi's eyes. He even suspected that he and the other mysterious Epsilons had been tricked by the Southwest region. They pretended to be fighting among themselves, but in reality, they were using this as an excuse to lure many powerful people here. However, Zhang Yi quickly dismissed this idea. If the Southwest region was united, they would have been powerful enough to invite the mutants from all the major regions of the Huashu Kingdom to come and help. After all, with the united region and the power of the Tantric faith to boost them to 20,000 Black Chariot level, no one would dare to covet the treasures of their Demon Kingdom. There was no need to go through all this trouble and put on a show. Zhang Yi rubbed his forehead. This was a complicated issue, and his mind was in turmoil, unable to think clearly. So he decided to go back and discuss it with Yang Xinxin first to see what advice she could give him. As for the Demon Kingdom's gates, no one could enter them now anyway, so he would wait and see. There was still a week before the Dharma assembly, which was enough time for them to do many things. After thinking it through, Zhang Yi turned around, used the intelligent system to determine his location, opened the dimensional gate, and shuttled out of the Great Snow Mountain. On the other side, Liang Yu and Mu Yan were investigating the entire Paji family's territory. They deeply detested the Paji family's evil deeds, but at this moment, they didn't dare to act rashly. But just at this moment, one of the Paji family's camps was attacked by the resistance army. Liang Yu and Mu Yan exchanged glances and immediately decided to go take a look. The resistance army was a civilian force in the southwest region, regarded by the four Tusi clans as the root of all evil in the Snowy Plateau. However, at this moment, watching the Paji family's actions with their own eyes, Liang Yu and Mu Yan began to wonder about the significance of the resistance army's existence. Perhaps the resistance army, which was fighting against the four Tusi in Sunga Temple, was the true representative of justice. This justice still needed to be put in quotation marks. Without contact, no one could tell if they were good or bad. Therefore, Liang Yu and Mu Yan quickly passed through, preparing to spy on them in secret. This was a camp where serfs lived, and on weekdays, it was guarded by private soldiers. However, at night, there weren't many private soldiers on patrol, with only a few people wandering around with guns. In the Snowy Plateau, the private soldiers weren't worried that these serfs would escape. Because if they left here, they had nowhere else to go. Although they lived like pigs and dogs here and were at risk of being taken away for sacrifice at any time, at least they could live a little longer. But without the protection of the four Tusi, none of them could survive a single day. It was like a flock of sheep raised by a farmer. The owner would occasionally slaughter a few, but most of the sheep would still be alive. However, anyone could kill the sheep that left the farm. Even the commander of the private militia once joked. For these serfs, there's no need for chains to restrain them. Just draw a circle in the snow with a stick, and they'll stay inside obediently, never daring to run out. They don't see it as a cage, instead, they think it's protection for them. But what's most frustrating is that, in a way, that's the truth. The Paji family's serf camp. Flames shot up into the sky, and in the dark night, the blue light shone like ghostly fires outside the camp. Oh whoa! A high-pitched wolf howl rang out, and the leader's cry was followed by the howling of the pack. A woman with long braids and a long whip in her hand rode a huge white wolf and charged into the camp. Behind her were hundreds of wild wolves from the Snowy Plateau. There were more than 30 powerful warriors on the wolves' backs. They were the resistance army, a force from the Snowy Plateau that did not obey the Sunga Temple and the four great families. The resistance army's attack was particularly sudden. The power of the four great families was very stable, and the resistance army's daily survival was extremely difficult. Usually, the four great families would try every means to hunt down the resistance army, while the resistance army could only launch guerrilla attacks against scattered family troops. But on this night, they chose to attack the Paji family. The sudden attack by the resistance army caught the Paji family's private soldiers off guard, and they were caught unawares. Soon, a large part of the camp was set on fire, and the flames shot up into the sky. The serfs ran out in fear, screaming in despair like sheep, or huddling together in groups. The woman in charge wielded a long whip in her hand and easily destroyed a house. Without pausing, she tore down the surrounding walls and shouted at everyone, "Get out of here! You are free! You are not anyone's slaves, and you are certainly not the Tussi Lord's food. Pick up your weapons and take back the food and warm houses that belong to you." The serfs trembled in fear, but upon hearing these simple and clear words of encouragement, many of their eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope. They weren't slaves. Food that belonged to them. And houses? Yes, they weren't born slaves. Before the end of the world, they had all had a bright future, but the blizzard that nearly destroyed the world had destroyed their homes and deprived them of their humanity. Now, they were nothing more than livestock for the Tussi Lords. They worked for them, entertained them, and even became their food. Slowly, some of them began to waver, and they stood up. The walls surrounding them were torn down by the resistance army, and they could leave. But where could they go? All the food had been confiscated by Tussi's private army, and if they left, they would soon freeze and starve to death. The voices of the resistance army rang in their ears. "Down with these evil demons who eat people and don't even spit out the bones. The food is ours, and the houses are ours. Only by killing them all can we live well. For ourselves and our families, take up arms and fight them. The brave were few. But the brave always exist. Especially when there is an example right in front of them, it is even easier to inspire people's fighting spirit." Those private soldiers who hastily got up to face the enemy were killed by the resistance army rushing in to fight them, as if they were cutting melons and vegetables. The valiant female leader wielded a long whip in her hand, and with a single lash, she could cut several private soldiers and their guns in half in an instant. The resistance army following behind her was also fierce, not to mention the large number of wolves under their control, which were also attacking Paji's private soldiers. I don't want to be a pig or a dog anymore." A young serf picked up a gun from a pool of blood, let out a furious shout, and aimed it at a private soldier not far away. The private soldiers did not expect the serf to dare to resist. The young serf's aim was terrible, but at close range with an assault rifle, as long as he could pull the trigger, it would be effective. Several private soldiers were shot to pieces on the spot. When they died, their faces were filled with fear and disbelief. They seemed to have forgotten that the people they had enslaved like pigs and dogs for the past 2 years were human beings. They were people just like them. Over time, people become numb due to their environment. People cease to be human, and pigs and dogs cease to be pigs and dogs. Only in death does fear truly exist. Liang Yu and Mu Yan moved here very quickly using shadow movement. They saw what the resistance army was doing from afar, which made Liang Yu's heart burn with passion. Sure enough, even in darkness, there is still light that cannot be hidden. Mu Yan poured cold water on her enthusiasm. Light does not necessarily triumph over darkness, and reality is not an idealized novel. "Miss Liang, you must not act impulsively. What is happening here has nothing to do with us." Liang Yu lowered her eyes. "I know that, don't worry. I won't do anything. But what if we tell them where the imprisoned women are and let them go rescue them?" Mu Yan said, "You have to listen to what I say." Indeed, at a time like this, how could anyone easily believe Liang Yu if she suddenly jumped out and said she would give them information? They might even think they were Paji's people, deliberately leading them into a trap. Liang Yu felt a little anxious. She was really worried about those poor women and didn't want to see them continue to suffer. However, they couldn't blindly reveal themselves at this moment and had to wait for the right opportunity. The arrival of the resistance army threw the camp into chaos. The private soldiers guarding the camp were caught off guard and many were killed. However, this was the Paji family's stronghold, and the commotion quickly alerted Pa Jigsaw. After listening, Pa Jigsaw calmly asked, "Has the Snow Eagle arrived?" The chief steward Lubu reported, "No, it seems that the person who came is the shepherdess Dolma." Pa Jigasang said indifferently, "Let Janda take some men there. Arrest those who should be arrested and kill those who should be killed." Lubu took his leave and withdrew step by step. Soon, the real elite troops of the Paji family were mobilized. A team of 20 chariots drove out from the Paji family's courtyard and headed straight for the serfs' camp. Although there weren't many people, the chariots were extremely well equipped. Each chariot was equipped with heavy machine guns, and most importantly, the more than 100 warriors on the chariots were all mutants. The leader of the team was one of the Paji family's few masters, Janda. The chariot troops arrived at the scene of the unrest. Janda was a dark-skinned man. He glanced at the chaotic camp and saw countless wild wolves running around, devouring the flesh of the private soldiers. "Kill!" He gave the order coldly. The machine gunners on the chariots did not hesitate and pulled the triggers. Blue flames spurted from the muzzles of their guns. They worked together seamlessly, surrounding most of the camp's entrances and exits with a network of fire from multiple directions. Bullets tore through the air with a shrill sound, followed by the sound of bullets hitting flesh and tearing flesh apart. For high-level mutants, especially combat-type mutants, guns are nothing more than toys. Only foot soldiers use this weapon as their main means of combat. Even Zhang Yi uses firearms as a medium to unleash his supernatural powers and kill his enemies. But in reality, for the vast majority of ordinary people in this world, and even low-level mutants, the lethality of firearms is still extremely terrifying. Janda led his elite chariot troops and arrived directly at the resistance army's camp. Then, they began to unleash their firepower on the entire camp without mercy. Bullets turned into a dense rain of fire in the night sky, mercilessly shooting at the entire serf camp. The wild wolves controlled by the resistance army, the serfs in the camp, and even some of the private soldiers were torn apart by powerful machine guns, their flesh and blood flying everywhere like broken pieces of cloth. This ruthless and unhesitating attack made Liang Yu's eyes widen and her fists clench unconsciously. "They are so cruel." Mu Yan said indifferently, "This is how a true killing machine should be. Only by being completely emotionless can one become the best soldier in this cruel world." Mu Yan was right. In the eyes of these elite soldiers, everyone in the camp was dead anyway. As long as they could get rid of their biggest problem, the resistance army, it wouldn't matter if a few more people died. In fact, humans were also creatures with a strong ability to reproduce. No matter how harsh the environment, some would always survive, and if given an unrestricted environment, they would reproduce unrestrainedly. The resistance army did not seem to have expected these soldiers to be so ruthless. But now that they were here, they were prepared to fight. The woman riding on the head wolf waved her long whip and blew a loud whistle with her fingers in her mouth. The pack of wolves immediately followed her lead and roared as they charged toward the chariots. The resistance army did not run away because they knew that if they did, all the people they had rescued from the camp would die today. "Run! Run south, quickly! Someone will take you to a land of freedom." The resistance army soldiers shouted to the terrified serfs. Most of the serfs cowered, burying their heads deep in their tattered cotton jackets and covering their ears so they wouldn't have to hear the shouting. It seemed that as long as they couldn't see or hear anything, all this would pass. Then they would still be able to work for Tusi every day and live a humble life. But some people knew that staying would definitely mean death. They could tell from the actions of the soldiers on the chariots that they didn't care about the lives of these serfs. Therefore, under the guidance of the resistance army, some people began to run desperately toward the distance. Dolma's pupils slowly turned a cold, icy blue, and her body began to change noticeably. White hair grew on her body, she grew nearly twice as tall, and her arms, legs, and waist became muscular and bulging. She turned into a white werewolf, and her mouth still clutched the long whip. Facing a hail of bullets, she swung the whip in her mouth. Clang! A layer of extreme coldness surrounded her, quickly turning into a circle of broken ice rings, and the whip in her mouth was also covered with a layer of sharp ice. Facing the hail of bullets, she suddenly swung the whip in her mouth, and it quickly extended to dozens of meters in length, then circled around her, forming an impenetrable wall of ice and snow in front of her. The bullets from the heavy machine guns couldn't penetrate this wall of broken ice. The commander of the soldiers, Janda, sat in his chariot, squinting at the sea of fire outside. War, flames, and the cries of dying men, such a scene made him feel uncontrollably excited. When he saw Dolma standing in front of him, Janda's eyes flashed with an intense, bloodthirsty light. "Senior member of the Resistance Army, I've captured you today. This is a great achievement. Even if you're not alive, you're still useful." In the snowy plateau, the weapons wielded by the four Tussi families were not as advanced as those in the Jiangnan region. They were even less qualified to summon the Reaper of Love. Therefore, when encountering high-level mutants, their only recourse was to dispatch high-level mutants as well. Janda calmly pushed open the car door and walked toward Dolma with his burly frame. The two had already seen each other, and there was a look of hatred and bloodlust in both their eyes. They knew that they were each other's opponents. Dolma's eyes were cold, and her expression was somewhat solemn. She knew Janda's strength. In the Paji family, he was one of the top 3 strongest fighters with a supernatural ability index of 9,700. On ordinary days, opponents of this level were dealt with by her older sister Bam. But today, Bam had led a team out to ambush the monks of Sangha Temple and had not returned. With no other choice, she had to lead the team herself. Bang! Bang! Janda's face broke into a bright smile, his snow-white teeth standing out in the night. He banged his fists together, making a sound like hitting a sandbag. With every step he took forward, a thick black smoke spread from his body. After a moment, the black smoke enveloped his entire body, and when he emerged from the smoke, his entire appearance had changed dramatically. He was nearly 5 meters tall, with black, metal-like skin, fiery red hair, and a pair of huge eyes with eyebrows that stood straight up. Janda, commander of the Paji family's private army, an enhancement mutant with the ability code Raging Vajra. "Hey!" His face was filled with rage, but a maniacal smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. He stomped his feet on the ground and rushed towards Dolma. A violent storm erupted from the spot. In order to buy time for the fleeing serfs, Dolma also let out a roar and charged forward. The leaders of the two sides clashed, and their subordinates quickly joined the fray, searching for their opponents and engaging in a fierce battle. Liang Yu and Mu Yan hid in the shadows and watched everything clearly. Mu Yan had to keep a close eye on Liang Yu to prevent her from acting impulsively and rushing out of shadow space to help the resistance army. Mu Yan felt that Liang Yu was capable of doing such a thing. Fortunately, Liang Yu was no longer the reckless girl she used to be. She was now able to think a little bit about the situation. However, the current situation was not optimistic for the resistance army. Judging from the results of the surprise attack, they had indeed caused tremendous damage to the Paji family's serf camp. But if they were here to rescue people, they would be adding a huge burden to themselves. Especially the battle between Dolma and Janda was extremely dangerous. Liang Yu and Mu Yan's attention was focused on Dolma and Janda. The southwest region was not very populous, and there were even fewer high-level mutants. If it weren't for the mysterious tantric sect, it was doubtful that Epsilon could have been born here. Therefore, captain-level mutants like Dolma and Janda were already incredibly powerful beings. But it was clear that Dolma was not as strong as Janda. She was only half Janda's size, and her strength was almost completely overwhelmed by Janda's. Janda's arms were like 2 huge golden pestles, and he aimed them at Dolma's body, striking her violently, like a pile driver, without stopping for a moment. Although Dolma was smaller than Janda, she did not have the advantage in reaction speed. After only a few moments of fighting, her attempts to counterattack were all mercilessly broken by Janda. This was followed by even more furious attacks. Boom! 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 The continuous roar was like a regiment of artillery firing on the camp. Janda's fists were even more terrifying than bullets. He didn't care about the lives of those around him, his only thought was to beat the female werewolf in front of him into a pulp. The aftermath of the battle left everyone in its wake dead, their bodies torn to pieces. The force of Janda's punches alone could easily knock dozens of serfs flying. Dolma held a long whip in her hand and used her inner strength to resist Janda's fierce attacks with great difficulty. However, the force she used to deflect his attacks inevitably transferred to other places. There were people everywhere, and because of the battle between the two, the number of people killed quickly reached hundreds. Dolma gritted her teeth. They had come to save people, but now these people were caught up in the battle and dying, and she felt helpless. However, the battle had already begun, and she would not soften her heart because of the deaths of these people. She was a warrior, and warriors had no men or women, only the living and the dead. Those who softened would surely die. The terrified serfs' eyes were bulging out of their sockets as they cried out in fear, calling for their parents. Some Tantra believers knelt on the ground with their hands clasped together in pain. Buddha! Please punish these evil demons. It is their arrival that has brought disaster upon us. They are all evil demons who harm people. Many of the serfs were terrified, and their eyes were filled with hatred as they looked at the resistance army. If it weren't for your arrival, we could at least live as pigs and dogs. But now that you've come, we're going to die soon. Why are you stopping us from being pigs and dogs? Our current suffering is only for the enjoyment of the next life. You are disturbing our practice. But right now, neither the Paji family's private army nor the resistance army cared what they thought. Whoever won was right. If the private army won, they would be beaten, and as long as they were lucky enough to survive, they would continue to live like pigs and dogs, waiting for the day they would die. If the resistance army won, they would be taken away, and they would happily kneel down and call them the apostles of the gods. Liang Yu watched the battle in front of her and judged based on her experience that Dolma's comprehensive combat power index, which was the ability index of a combat-type mutant, was at most 9,500 points. Even a few months ago, when Liang Yu's ability index was only 9,500 points, she still had a chance to kill Dolma in close combat. Dolma's skills were too poor, and she only had brute strength and powerful supernatural abilities. If she continued to fight Janda, it would take no more than 5 minutes before she was knocked down. Liang Yu didn't want the resistance army to fail. In her heart, she already believed that the resistance army were the good guys. Moreover, she hoped that the resistance army could rescue the poor women in the dungeon. Liang Yu bit her lip and finally made a decision. I have to go help them. Mu Yan looked at Liang Yu, her face expressionless. Aren't you afraid of exposing your identity? This might affect Zhang Yi's plan. Liang Yu said, Don't worry, I am proficient in more than 300 martial arts, including Tantra's stick fighting and boxing, so they won't recognize me. After all, enhancement mutants are the hardest to distinguish. But Mu Yan, you have to do me a favor this time. We have to figure out a way to get the resistance army to rescue those poor women. When she brought this up, Mu Yan fell silent. No woman could bear to see the plight of those women. If the two of them didn't seize this opportunity today, there might not be a next time. Mu Yan thought about it for a long time before slowly nodding her head. You must hide your identity well. I'll take them to rescue the people. Let's make it clear first, I won't intervene. So even if your identity is exposed, it's your own business. Liang Yu smiled faintly, okay. On the other side, Dolma was forced to fight Janda one-on-one. From the very beginning, she was completely overwhelmed. Whether it was combat experience or ability index, she was no match for the commander of the Paji family's private army. She could only rely on her beast-type agility to dodge with difficulty. But she knew that if she continued like this, it was only a matter of time before she was defeated. Dolma's heart began to sink. Her teammates were spread too thin and had no chance of coming to her aid. She knew better than anyone what terrible consequences would await her if she fell into the hands of these guys. If that happened, she would have no choice but to give up her life. However, just as Dolma was in dire straits, a cold female voice suddenly came through her earpiece. I can help you deal with this guy. The combat suit Dolma was wearing was confiscated from Tussi's private army and then modified with some simple intelligent systems. This equipment was quite old, and the intelligent system only had basic functions. Therefore, Liang Yu's high-end equipment could easily hack into her combat suit and communicate with her directly. The sudden voice startled Dolma at first, but the situation at hand left her no time to think. She rolled sideways and dodged Janda's punch. Boom! The large area of ice beneath her was blown to smithereens, and the hard snow within a radius of several hundred meters cracked like a spider web. Who are you? Dolma asked breathlessly. At this point, she had nothing to lose. Liang Yu continued, I'm here to help you deal with this guy. 3 kilometers northeast of here, there is a courtyard where more than 100 women are being held captive. I want you to rescue them. If you agree, I'll help you right away. Dolma was startled by her words and said ecstatically, You know where they are? We came here to find them. My sisters are among them. I accept your conditions. Liang Yu took a deep breath, raised her head suddenly, and took off. Okay, I'm coming.